What kind of game do you get when you take two legendary developers, one being Firefly that created the Stronghold series and the other being Fireaxis that created Civilization by Sid Meier? Well, you get CivCity Rome, a wonderfully chill, laid-back game that is really a blast to play, but for some reason I feel like it deserves more attention because it was received not so well by the various review outlets at the time it was released in 2006. Let's look at some of the reasons for that, and also why I believe it does deserve some more attention than it currently gets. Even though the title of this video says that it's Sid Meier's forgotten game, it is difficult to say how much input he actually had into this overall process. The reason I say that is it appears to be primarily developed by Firefly. There's a few pieces of evidence I can point to that shows that's probably the case. One, if we pull up the actual game, we can see on the bottom right hand corner there's an image for Firefly but nothing else listed. Going to the manual, we also can see there's a huge list of names for everyone associated with Firefly, and only a small handful of people, including Sid Meier and a few others, associated with Fireaxis. A final piece of evidence I can point to is an interview from 2006 with one of the developers of Firefly that had also worked on the entire Stronghold series. He says that it was their idea to essentially put a city of civilization under a magnifying glass. So it does seem like with all of this taken together, Sid Meier and the rest of the team did not necessarily put in some development time, but instead helped with some creative direction. What's the purpose of going through all of this explaining to show that it was ultimately Firefly from the Stronghold series that created CivCity Rome? Well, I think this helps set some expectations before we even get into the game, so we know that it takes more influence from the Stronghold series than it does from Civilization. This leads in well into one of the reasons why some of the reviewers back at that time in 2006 may have rated the game poorly. Some of their expectations probably looked at it more along the lines of Civilization than something from Stronghold. Another common theme that I was reading when going through some of these older reviews is that people's citizens were actually leaving their cities en masse. Now, that definitely can happen in the game, and there are some easy ways to avoid it that we'll go over when we look at the mechanics. But if that does happen, even then, it's not such a big deal because at least you can create an entire mass of goat farms. So at least you have them instead of people. There was another common theme that I saw come up time and time again, and it had to do with some of the bugs that they came across. Thankfully, the majority of them are fixed now in the game, but there are still some that remain behind, and I believe they're worth addressing because there are a handful of comments on Steam and GOG that point this out. One of the more common bugs that seems to happen for people and is more disrupting than others is the lazy worker bug, which is a hilarious name that people coined for it because their workers stop doing anything and they just go on strike and hang out at home all day. During my playthrough, I didn't experience this bug and I'm on the GOG version, but I did want to point out some helpful advice over on the Steam forums of people that were able to resolve it on their side, and they even had others reply to them that said it helped them too. The reason I want to show this is because it can be a game-breaking bug where you can't actually progress further in the campaign, so if you experience this, look on the forums because I have seen a handful of different ways of how people solved it. Since we're talking about both GOG and Steam, now is a wonderful time to mention that you can get the manual for free whenever you buy it on either of the stores. That's really appreciated because manuals are something that we don't see too often nowadays, and in this case it has full color, which is also nice instead of being only black and white. The only downside is it doesn't really explain the lead up to the Roman society and the Roman way of life. It does, however, give you about 100 pages of exhaustive descriptions of all of the buildings and all of the mechanics. It's not necessary to read through everything in order to understand how to actually play the game, but there were a couple of instances when I first started where I didn't understand certain mechanics, and I did actually reference back to this manual and it helped in certain situations. Although the manual doesn't give us any lead up to the events of the game, it does tell us that the time period is set around that of Julius Caesar. I would also like to point out at this time a couple of things I noticed about the box when I pulled up some PDF versions of that as well online. It is not really trying to stand out as anything flashy or something that's trying to get your attention. Now, in terms of game sales, that probably didn't help very much, but I actually really like here how it's more of a plain box, and it really fits the tone of this game, as we'll see, being more chill and laid back. That's going to be a theme that you'll hear me reference probably multiple times. With all this information that we just went through, why don't we take a look and watch the opening game cinematic to see what it has in store for us.
From its humble beginnings, one small, insignificant settlement on the banks of an Italian river would grow. Its armies were unstoppable, the power of its commerce and the reach of its trade unequaled, and such spectacles as to fire the imagination. In time, it would come to create the greatest empire the world had ever known. Now you must rebuild the glory, the splendor that was Rome.
This is a really nice opening cinematic because it tells us exactly what we need to know, that we are going to rebuild Rome, and it doesn't do it in any kind of flashy, over-the-top way. In fact, it actually reminds me of those old school History Channel documentaries that I used to watch when I was younger, and this is in a good way because I always enjoyed watching those back in the day. When looking at these initial options on the screen, we can immediately notice something that shows us an influence from Civilization for anyone familiar with that game and franchise, that being the Civilopedia. I'm glad they added this because it is something extra that they didn't need to put in at all if they didn't want to, but some of it does strike me as more interesting comments, not so much that you're actually learning about something. An example is this one about the Roman roads and the comment that they're famous the world over for their roads. However, there's this other point that makes a really fascinating statement about the fact that motels, or the equivalent of them back in the Roman times, being about 20 miles apart from each other. Overall, I don't mind that they don't have any cinematics here of things moving, and also that things are listed in bullet point format. I only would prefer that they actually put more of those fascinating facts in here, because that's something I really enjoy learning about. We now go to one of the subjects that might be incredibly important to you depending on your preferences, that being the game visuals. Now, maybe it's because I've been focusing almost primarily on games from the 1990s for the past year and a half, but I did think this looks beautiful. I had a really great time watching this, and I didn't think anything about the graphics at all in terms of something negative. The only thing that comes to me is, of course, it does seem to be more of a neutral color palette, I suppose, with brown and white and tan. There's not a lot of overall color, but there is some, and I feel like it does help to make it pop out even more when you see it because of some of those more earthy tones. If we briefly go back to that developer interview from Firefly Studios back in 2006, we learn one of the major points they wanted to get across is that people over the course of the Stronghold series wanted to see more in-depth information about the citizens that were running around throughout the city. They absolutely succeeded in that, and I believe it's one of the highlights of the game that did draw me in while I was playing it, because I'm able to see every single citizen in the city and see what house they're tied to, where they work, what they're doing. Everybody has a routine, and you can actually see that, and the game gives you the chance to follow them throughout their daily roles in this city. This is a huge strength of the game, and I honestly cannot overstate it enough how much I enjoyed watching citizens go about their daily routines while I was playing the game. Something that I thought was so wonderful about this is the developers seem to have purposefully made the game somewhat of a slower pace, so that way you can actually watch the citizens as they're doing things. So you have the time to do that. You're not always having to stress about what needs to be done. If we look at a specific example of this, we can start with the iron workers. We see them physically walk down into the mine, come back, smelt the iron, and then create iron bars. You can tell an amazing amount of detail went into every single action that we're watching these characters go through. Another example is you see a baker that puts loaves in an oven, then cooks them before taking them out for people to come by and grab for their house. Another example could be a tunic maker that is making these garments for the citizens of the city along with the olive press to give people their olive oil. All of these have their own unique interactions and their own unique animations. If you don't feel like watching the shop workers, then we could always move over to the farmers, and in this case, watch the wheat farmers go through their fields, take everything down, bundle it, make sure that it's in all good order before sowing their farm again in order to grow additional wheat. It's an amazing process to watch and go through if you just feel like hanging out for a couple of minutes. And again, the amount of detail that goes into this is incredible because we can also see, since I mentioned the olive press earlier, we can see this olive grove. The workers are actively taking down the olives from the trees, and we can see that some of it disappears as they do so. Some of the animations I have to be most impressed by are the dock workers as they unload a ship that's returned from trading with another city at the sea. All of the workers get together to unload these ships, and it looks like they're on some kind of a hamster wheel, and at first I wasn't sure if that was something the developers put in on their own accord or if they researched it, so I tried to look it up. Sure enough, they must have done incredible research on this game, and this is another example of it, because we can find evidence that this is how ancient Romans used to unload or load things. Pretty incredible to see this level of detail in the game, and there are many times I just sat here watching the dock workers as I was going around doing things in the city. Going back to the interview from 2006, the developers had said that one of their other major goals with creating CivCity Rome was to create a physical representation for the player to see things, such as the resources they were gathering. They didn't want it to be a static number that you looked at on the screen and just saw it grow or shrink. They wanted you to physically be able to see inside of the granaries, for example, is what they specifically used as an example. This is a huge benefit of the game that I also found really enjoyable because you can tell when something is overflowing and you can tell when you may need to create another one or if it's completely empty. A couple examples of buildings that stood out to me in this way have to be one, the aqueduct, because it is such an iconic symbol of ancient Rome and the engineering that went into it was just mind-blowing to me even when I first learned about them. There's also the temples, and the temples in the game are gorgeous, and you have two different variations. You can build a smaller one or a larger one, and they are dedicated to different gods. We'll go into that a little bit later in detail. We also have bathhouses, and then amphitheaters, of course, for the gladiators to fight in, where you can easily observe that as well. Then there's the theaters for plays, which are great because you get to see all of the citizens gather together and sit in the seats as the play is happening. Lastly, I do need to mention the circus for chariots because I found myself going back to that time and time again just to watch them race each other. The only interesting thing is, after the race ends, for whatever reason, they animated it that they melt into the ground, which was funny when I first saw it, but you get used to it after a few times. You know, I commented on the color palette earlier, and I want to bring up the fact that although the maps don't seem to have a lot of variation in the sense of it looks to be always around summertime or in the spring or somewhere around there, the maps are incredibly varied in the sense of their layout, and they were handcrafted, it appears, because resources and different locations of wood and water are constantly placed differently on each map. Given the development time and if they had the opportunity to add it, of course it would have been nice if there were different seasons so we could see not only the look of the levels might change, but also how that affects strategy. But I still found myself really liking the levels that had water, mainly because it still can affect strategy, but it does add that nice, vibrant pop of color. Why don't we move on to some of the music of the game? Because it is a highlight for me in the sense that it is orchestral and it has no words associated with it. This is great for me personally because I love being able to get more absorbed into the game, and with the music being orchestral and not having vocals, it made it easier to focus on the tasks that I needed to do while I was building up the cities. The sound of the game has a unique and interesting feature that absolutely enhances it, and I would like to mention it this time. You have an option of being fully zoomed out, and you can hear the sounds of the bustling city and all of the noise of people going about their daily routines and all of the talking in the background. Compared to that, you could have a more intimate view if you feel like zooming in, where you don't have to hear all the surrounding noises of the city. You can go into a specific person or area and hear the sounds associated with it. However, I will mention the game does not have a huge variety of these sounds, but it is a lot more peaceful than being fully zoomed out. For example, we could look at these woodcutters and listen to them for a bit. We also have a general announcer in the game that does bring up multiple things that can tell you when a city is going off the rails, or if something good is happening, like traders buying supplies in distant lands, or if your granary is running out of food.
Food levels in our granaries are dangerously low.
The person's voice that's speaking is nice because they said it in a calming manner, and I appreciate that they didn't add a lot of drama or any intensity to it when they're saying these things going on. The only thing is, the game repeats these voice lines so often and with so much frequency that I ended up going in to mute it entirely so I didn't have to hear any of these announcements further, because sometimes they can be queued up 4 or 5 voice lines deep.
Food levels in our granaries are dangerously low. Governor, our city granaries are now empty. Governor, enemies have been sighted in the Empire. They are heading towards our city. City happiness is falling.
The nice thing is, even if you do mute this sound, you are able to tell what's going on when some of the major events happen by looking at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Anytime things happen like a fire, or if you're being invaded by an enemy army, you do see a short cinematic play in the bottom left-hand corner that alerts you to things happening. So that's what I ended up using as I continued through the game. If we look at other kinds of voice lines, something I also was incredibly impressed by is the sheer number of voice lines that they had put into this game for every situation with the citizens speaking about it.
There's a rumor going around that you never sleep. Is that true? I met a traveller the other day who said the lands to the north are always covered in ice. Do you ever get that feeling of déjà vu? I think I said that earlier, actually.
There's everything from the trading situation to talking about foreign armies and invasions to talking about Roman emperors, the farming situation, maybe it's the political situation. Or maybe it's about the temples that you have in the city, or the lack of those. Same with the water situation. There are countless voice lines for every situation, and I did find it extremely refreshing to just click on the citizens once in a while to hear what they had to say.
I can get almost anywhere I want by road. That's great.
I must demand that you construct some temples. If the barbarians don't destroy our city, then the gods surely will. The level of public entertainment is very poor.
We're under attack! We're under attack!
You know, if nothing else, the game deserves an award for the fact that it has the creepiest adult voice imitating a child's voice that I've heard in a long time. Creepy? Yes. But you know what? Thank you to whoever did that voice line, because it is absolutely ridiculous and made me laugh more than I think anything else in the game. Okay, so all of that aside, I do have an admission to make in front of everybody that's listening right now, and that is, I played the game probably 80% of the time completely muted. As much as I was enjoying some of the game sounds and the music and the characters talking when I clicked on them, I found it was so much more peaceful to play in the kind of silence in order to focus on building and growing the city and to address anything that arose as the game presented different issues or things that just popped up in general. It was in that moment that it came to me that this is a wonderful game if you feel like having a relaxing day after a long time at work, or if you have other things going on in life. Playing this game on mute feels as though it could be a kind of therapy, and even if you didn't feel like that was something that was interesting to you, I highly suggest playing it without sound to at least give it a try to see how it can be calming in nature and potentially help you relax after a long day. Now's a great time to move on to the mechanics, and if there was one word I would use to describe how the economy works and runs in this game, it would be housing. The reason for this is because houses are the only source of income in the game. Based on the number of houses and the level the houses are at, because they can be upgraded to higher levels, we earn money from them by taxing those houses, and the higher their level, the more they are taxed. If during the course of the game we run out of money, we are able to take out a couple of loans from the city of Rome. If we run out of money a third time, then we do officially lose the game. And I didn't see anywhere inside of it when I was researching about how you actually take out a loan from the city of Rome, but it is incredibly easy after I finally figured it out after trying to mess around so much. All you do is spend money to go into the negative, and then it automatically takes out the loan for you. So anyone else that comes across the same thing I did and was lost, there you go, that's all you have to do. If we go back to the housing, I mentioned that you not only need to create more quantity-wise to have more money, you also need to level them up. While there are 15 levels of houses, I won't go through every single one and the requirements for them, but let's go through the first small handful so we can see what is needed. Housing begins with a shack. And what does a shack need exactly? It only needs water to level up. And we can get water from one of two ways. The first is from a well, or we can go with the combination of an aqueduct with a cistern. Okay, so that's not too bad so far, but what about the next level of house? It's a small hut, and it needs not only water, but also meat. We can get meat from goat farms. Well, in order to get the meat from there, though, we need a butcher. And then, in order for the butcher to store that meat, we need the granary that was mentioned earlier in the video. And then we're able to transform it into a medium hut. There you need not only the water and meat, but then tunics. And to get a tunic, you need a tunic shop. That is from a flax farm for the tunic maker to be able to gather the flax. If we jump 2 housing levels ahead, it's added on olive oil, which needs an olive press and an olive grove to be able to store all of that. We also need beds. But to be able to build beds, you have to have a carpenter, and carpenters require wood. So okay, getting a little bit more complicated because not only that, also religion is now introduced, and we need to have temples for people to go be able to be religious in this case. Okay, so as you can tell, it's getting quite a bit more complicated than the first few levels of housing. And again, there are 15 levels of housing in total, to the point where the max level of housing is a palace, and that requires 28 different goods in order to maintain its status. On its own, the 28 items isn't necessarily a challenge because all you do is build up everything as you continue to grow the city, so it almost happens naturally in a way. What can make it complicated is when you add in all of the various mechanics that surround the housing system. For example, 1, if you have a house that already previously had access to goods, but if you don't have enough of that because maybe you have too many houses at the same level, then the house is able to be downgraded if they don't have access to that good. Another system is making sure that your citizens can actually reach the goods that they need in order to progress the housing level. You can tell how far a citizen is willing to walk from their house when you first initially place it. You can see that green circle that's around it, and as the houses continue to level up, that radius becomes larger. Because we're on the topic of houses, I'd like to comment on the insulas specifically, because these are the ones you're able to build at a certain point in the game where you place them on top of the butcher shops and the tunic shops, among others that we mentioned earlier. There's something about the way that these look. They're so beautiful, and it just reminds me of some kind of an old school downtown Italian area that you can even see today in Italy. I for sure actually found myself going back to these areas in my towns time and time again when I was playing the game just to enjoy the atmosphere. So thank you developers for adding that kind of atmosphere into the game. If we go back to some of the mechanics, we can see that even the shops also have their own radius that if you zoom out fully with the camera, you can see in a yellow circle where that radius is for the people in the shops to go pick up the goods they need to do any kind of processing. There's also another system of a worker shift, where the red is their working hours and the blue is their downtime. This is an interesting system because it leads to one of those simulation kind of feelings where you're actually trying to balance the lives of the citizens in your city, so that can be really nice. It does sometimes add to some ridiculous scenarios though, where you might have somebody like a stone worker that is slaving away all day working hard at the stone, and then they go home and because of the animations that the developers give them, they don't think that's enough. They go and try and do multiple pull-ups. Sometimes it can almost feel like they're in some kind of a strange competition where one person starts and then it somehow infects everyone else. But you know what? To each their own. By the way, if we want to see what a citizen is doing at any point in time while they're running around throughout the city, we can click on them and tell by the green arrow showing that that's their home, red is their working location, and blue is their current destination. The next mechanic to cover is one of the more important in the game, and it's the one that all of the reviewers said made their citizens leave the city, and that is the city's happiness. If we look at the screen that shows all the different things that go into the happiness, there's a decent handful, but there's only a few that truly seem to matter the most. Many of them you'll naturally rise as you continue to play the game and build things and all of that sort of nature. However, something like the wages, you are able to influence by increasing or decreasing them. If you increase the wages, you make less money, but then people are happier. The same is true with the rations. You are able to increase them, so yes, your food stores run out quicker, but people become happier. Outside of the few options that you can actively move around to try and increase happiness, one of the main ones is making sure that all of your workers are actually housed. That is a huge thing that I saw contributed to a lot of unhappiness when I was playing the game. The unemployment levels are important to note because they only increase in unhappiness as the game progresses. This is a static thing that you cannot affect, at least from what I've seen. However, the primary option on the screen I haven't touched base with yet that seems to make the unhappiness the highest it's ever been, at least in my games, is the city's civilization rating. I'm not sure why exactly, but this was one of the more overwhelming things for me while I was trying to learn and understand all of the mechanics, but once you get the hang of it, it is extremely simple. The civilization rating on the right is this main pillar, and it consists of 4 separate sections. There's entertainment, religion, civic services, and splendor. Each of those 4 sections have subsections inside of them. For example, entertainment has entertainment access for people to be able to reach those things. There's music recitals, circus races, and a handful of others. If we look at the religion section, you need to make sure that the citizens are able to access all of the different types of temples to those gods. And also you want to have at least 2 of each temple to fulfill the requirement to the max. If we look at civic services and splendor, it's more of the same thing where you can see there's certain items that need to be created or that citizens need access to be able to increase the civilization rating. If you ever feel slightly overwhelmed when you're going through the game and trying to learn all of the systems, one of the easiest ways I found to increase the civilization rating is to locate a spot on the map and just create tons of gardens and fountains and statues. That is a great way to increase it really quickly. It's not the prettiest looking thing because if you take more time, you can make a city look beautiful. But if you're in a hurry to rise that civilization rating so you don't lose all of your citizens to unhappiness, do that first and then clean everything up later. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but the game does have wonders in it because of that tie-in to the Civilization series, and they made it one of the requirements for you to be able to increase your civilization rating. You can build things like the Pantheon, there's also the Great Library, both of those are absolutely beautiful structures. And of course there's the Colosseum where you can see all sorts of battles take place, but one of the things that stuck out to me is how they put so much detail into even creating some murals if you zoom in and see the side of the arena. We have another tie-in to the Civilization series, and that is that we can research technologies here. Some of the reviewers said that they didn't really like this because they're sort of flat and mainly just static bonuses. Kind of like, okay, increase this by 30% or increase that by a temporary boost. But I don't know, depending on the scenario, you do have some strategy because you need to decide which to research first based on the need of the scenario. And I also feel like it gives a nice sense of progression because as you're continually building up the city, you are making things more efficient by researching these technologies, so it gives that sense that you're consistently striving and improving the city. Of course, we also need to mention there's trading in the game, and it can be done either by land or by sea, just depending upon what's available in the game and based on where the cities are located. The cities will buy only certain things from you, and they will also only sell certain things to you. This adds an amazing variety to the maps while you're going not only through the campaign, but also some of the free play maps that they include as just standalone entries. Sometimes you're missing different resources and you have to trade with other cities. This definitely adds strategy because you need to decide when to do that because some of it can cost money, and also when do you sell things or do you want to keep them to continue to build up your city? Really interesting, and I enjoy that they added this in. One of the final mechanics to cover are some light RTS elements that are included in CivCity Rome. By light, I mean, for example, you can build up to 3 of these forts, and that's it, nothing else. But inside of each of these forts, you can create legionaries, and I believe they're called velites, I think that's their name, and they throw those pilums. You don't actually control each individual unit in some kind of a typical RTS or real-time strategy style. Instead, each unit has a commander or a leader, and then by selecting them, you move the entire troop around the map. And it sometimes feels like you just sort of run them into the enemy, so again, it's nothing strategic in depth, it's there, and I'm glad it is at least, because it does add something to the game that you have to watch for on certain maps. And again, you are able to actually send them onto the world map to attack other cities or settlements that are sending armies to you, but it is not exactly something that I would say is exciting, and that's okay, it doesn't have to be exciting, it's only that you move your units across the map and you see them as a circle. If they come across a city, they just kind of walk into it. You don't actually see anything play out. I was hoping for some kind of cinematic, but that's okay, you just sort of walk them over, at least it's there. You know, I've mentioned multiple times how relaxing the game can be, and it definitely is, but something these RTS elements do add in is a sense of pressure when you play these certain style of maps. Mainly because instead of it being completely up to your own pace of when you want to build things, the enemy towns do send out warriors to attack you. That puts a certain time constraint on when you actually do things, and you have to build up your defenses by a certain time. So that, in combination with the final mechanics to mention, and that being that there's fires in the game and also riots that can happen to your cities, definitely makes it so the game isn't always laid back. But to be fair, the fire and the riots only happen if you set it to a hard difficulty. If you don't set it to the hard difficulty, then you at least don't have to worry or deal with fires or riots, so that's entirely up to you. If I didn't mention it before, the only thing that I could find when I did research on what the difficulty affects outside of the riots and fires is the amount of the loan that Rome gives you. It doesn't affect your starting cash available. It's at this point that I would like to take a couple moments to discuss some general strategy for the game, and I am by no means very good at this, I will be totally honest, so if anyone else has some ideas, please mention it in the comments below. But I found that this is a huge reason why people seemed to rate the game poorly, and it makes sense because the game doesn't really describe how you should do things in terms of strategy. It only tells you that you should place certain things next to each other, but nothing else. So after I was looking up online and seeing how other people do things, and then also from my own experience, this is the one time a strategy guide would have actually worked, so I'll do my best to explain how I did it and see how you can maybe build upon that from there. I found for me that setting houses in either this 3x2 format or this 4x2 format and doing it a couple of rows deep, as you see on the screen, really helped to be able to consolidate where my houses are. From there, I chose one side of the houses to have all of the shops that are available in the game, and some of those being the meat shops, the olive press, the tunic shop, some of those that I mentioned earlier. Then on the other side, I would try to leave space available for things like maybe a bathhouse or different religious temples. And then the same thing is true on the north and the south side. I would try to leave space so whatever buildings were needed to upgrade the houses, I could place them there. As you can see on the screen, the main town center is in the middle, and I would do this on either the left-hand side or the right, but whichever side I started on, I tried to duplicate it as best as I could on the other side of the town, just to make things easier. I would also suggest to potentially choose a southern or northern side of your base that's kind of on the outside of the perimeter to where you put your various farms and then also some of your storehouses and the granaries. It can really help to keep all of that together as well, sort of on the outskirts. I wouldn't say this is the most efficient, but it seemed a lot more efficient than when I first started playing and everything was just kind of randomly placed together. So if anybody has suggestions, please put it in the comments, not only for my sake, but for anyone else that doesn't really know what to do. The last thing to mention is that there are a couple of research strategies I highly suggest trying out to see if you can make your city more efficient, because it definitely helped for me. The first is to go with the research that increases your research speed. That is alphabet, basic education, and then further education. After that, the next best one seems to be the one that increases your tax revenue for additional money, and that is mathematics, coinage, and then banking. After that, go with whatever works best for the scenario that you're currently playing or whatever the level is. It could be something with trading or maybe farming, that's always a good option, or it could be something with the military. Okay, well now that everyone listening is a pro at the game, why don't we look at the campaign and see what that has in store for us? While the game does have a story, don't go in expecting anything crazy at all. It is basically a backdrop to help us go through missions, which the campaign is meant to be more of a long tutorial, but still, there is not really too much of a story. What I mean by that is we begin as a Roman engineer and we start by rising up through the ranks of both the Roman political and military world. This first character asks us to build some stone and send it to Rome, purely because Rome wants stone.
This should be enough to set up the small mining concern needed. The locals nearby are placid enough and should easily be recruited. Apart from a few wild beasts nearby, I expect you to encounter no problems.
From there, we need to continue going to another town to help them recover after some kind of a disease and some fires that have swept through. We then get introduced to another character that shortly after this begins to call us Quester, which is a Roman treasurer, so as we can see, we're rising up through the ranks as we help these towns. The only thing is, this next person tells us to then create vineyards and to send wine over to Rome, purely because Rome wants wine and we can make a lot of money from it.
Find the perfect site for our new city, and make enough wine to drown the whole of Rome. I have every faith that neither of us will be disappointed.
It's not to say it's all like this, because one time we do come across somebody that says we need to help a town because they've been destroyed by fires. Because of those fires, locals think that it's ghosts that are causing these things, so we need to build a temple to help calm everybody's nerves. That's a great way not only to introduce a new mechanic, which is building temples, but they also introduce it in a way that feels completely believable, especially for that time period. Continuing through the missions, a character starts to call us E-Dial after they say we've received another promotion. The only thing is, they don't actually tell us what that is in the game world, so when I was first playing through this, I had no idea what those titles meant, only I knew that I was rising up through the ranks. I did do a Google search outside of playing the game, and I found that E-Dial is a Roman magistrate responsible for public buildings and public games. That is a really interesting title and a really interesting role. The only thing is, since the game doesn't explain that to us, we really don't understand the context of what we're going through. It came to me while I was playing this that one of the options that could have made the story somewhat more impactful is if we were potentially somebody that was adopted by a Roman family, and then that person wants to rise up through the ranks, but they don't really know the Roman society and they don't know the titles and the steps they need to go through. That way, maybe we could have somebody in the game that's a mentor and they explain all of this to the main protagonist, which we, the player, are able to then understand what's going on and what we're trying to aim for, and also what these titles actually mean. I want to be sure to point out that it's definitely not bad, and I don't think this is wrong that they went about it in this way. It's only that I think it could be slightly improved, but I do appreciate that the story is here in general and that we are going through these missions, mainly because, again, the primary highlight of CivCity Rome are the missions themselves and the actual gameplay. Every single mission I fully enjoyed going through what they were asking and figuring out the new buildings and understanding the mechanics. That was a wonderful part of going through this. And even after a mission is finished, you are able to hit the continue button, so you don't have to jump immediately to the next mission. You can spend as long as you want on each map, just continuing to build up for as long as you feel like it. Somewhat early on in the campaign, it splits narratively to where you can then choose either military missions or to continue the farming and civilization style missions. It's a little bit strange because on the one hand, it seems like you should go with the military missions because the narrator tells us that's the best way for us to continue getting promotions inside of the Roman Empire. On the other hand, the military missions are actually more difficult from my experience, and it could just be with my lack of understanding with the game at this point, but they are more difficult than if you go with the civilian missions, especially given that you have the time limit before other cities start attacking you. I did decide to go with what made sense narratively, so I chose to continue with the military missions first. I did find the military campaign a little bit more interesting story-wise because it loosely follows the Roman Empire's war with Carthage, and especially the time period during when Hannibal was leading the Carthaginian armies. One of the missions explicitly shows us and discusses us defending northern Italy while Hannibal is crossing the Alps, and that is a really nice tie-in because then we do end up getting attacked by multiple troops, one of them being elephants. I was really enjoying this map too because I could tell the developers handcrafted it to thematically tie it in to Hannibal crossing over the Alps, given that we have all of these valleys on the map where the armies can attack from. After this mission, we then go to Spain in order to defeat the rest of Carthage's armies. This was a mission I almost lost multiple times because for whatever reason, the enemy cities were attacking me faster than I have ever experienced before, so just a heads up when you play this mission. I didn't mention it earlier when I was commenting about the RTS elements, but something that can make these missions a little bit more difficult is that sometimes the enemy tends to want to run around your army or your units to go straight for your buildings and civilians. And it sometimes feels like your units are just chasing them all around the city but not actually engaging them. That happens sometimes. So given that, there's moments where during these missions I would build up my military units and just set them at the side where the enemy army would come from, which in many cases you are able to tell what direction that they will arrive at because there's this flag on the outskirts of the map. So at least there's that because you now know where they'll attack from. Very helpful. One of the next missions has us going to Germany because they want us to help defend the Roman border against all the barbarian attacks and invasions. Again, it's a nice tie-in to what happened in real life where the Roman Empire did actually have to deal with this, so it's interesting to see that they put this at least roughly in the game. The final mission for this portion of the campaign has us going to Britannia to establish a base there. As one might expect for the final military mission, it has us defend against multiple attacks pretty early on, so once you get established and defend your base and you can be relatively comfortable, it then opens up to allow you to build magnificent structures and really take your time to build up the city. This was a mission I had a really great time with because I actually, for one of the first times when I was playing through the game initially, decided to put quite a bit of time and energy into trying to create a relatively nice looking entrance to the city. Forgive me if it doesn't look too great because it was my actual first attempt, but overall it's nice the game allows you to mess around with this and I was just enjoying even taking the time trying to do it. When I got to the end of completing the mission and I wanted to mute all of the music so that way I could actually hear what was being said really easily for the story portion, that ended up leading to something that was unintentionally hilarious.
I think this is indeed worthy of a triumph, my friend. I can guarantee you this. Your return into Rome this time will not be a quiet one.
I assume that there are sounds of clapping and cheering going on in the background, and I had no idea that muting the music would actually mute that portion of it, so lesson learned for next time. Going back to some of the civilian missions at this point, per usual, it doesn't have a lot story-wise outside of building up these different cities so that we can glorify the city of Rome and the Roman Empire. However, interestingly enough, on one of the next missions, I did come across earthquakes for the first time in the game, and I didn't experience this anywhere else on any other missions that I played.
An earthquake has hit the city, destroying several buildings and unsettling the population.
Everything else up to this point in the campaign felt like you could mitigate any negative things that happened because you can maybe prepare for it. This felt completely random, and on the one hand, I was really lucky because my camera happened to be right at the location so you could see it unfold. On the other hand, this is probably my least favorite mechanic because of having to rebuild all of the houses. If it's from a fire or something else like wild animals or from another city attacking, again, I feel like that's more manageable than this kind of complete random destruction of buildings. The nice thing is, it didn't happen very often, and in this particular mission, the map itself, again, per usual, is beautiful, so overall, it was still enjoyable. The next mission contained a lot of firsts for me. One, it wanted us to ship some wheat to Rome story-wise, not for any particular reason really, but it's the first mission, and also the only mission in the campaign, that has a time limit associated with the beginning part of it. It's also the first mission that I actually lost because I forgot to pay attention to that time limit, and then I lost the game. When I eventually was able to go back, and I did complete the first part, and it leads into the second part of the mission, where then it does want us to complete all of those shipments of wheat to Rome. There's something about these open-ended style of missions where they just say, hey, you need to send wheat to Rome, and we don't actually have to send wheat to Rome. They want us to only collect it. So then what do? Of course, only have to go and create an entire industry of farms on this separate side of the river. Even though at first I thought it was going to be funny, it ended up being such a great time because then I just sat there watching all of these farmers do their thing. It's really nice that the game allows you to do something like this. If I skip ahead a couple of missions, I haven't mentioned it yet, but this older gentleman we're speaking to is supposed to be Caesar in the game. So throughout some of the missions, we have been helping Caesar as he asks us to build up this city and build up that city, or ship this thing or ship that thing to Rome. On this final mission of the civilian campaign, as you would probably expect, it is incredibly epic in scope in terms of what it requests of you because you need to build 5 palaces, which are the max level of housing. It's one of those missions that you absolutely should be prepared to take your time with and make sure you save plenty of times throughout so you can always go back if something goes wrong throughout it. Thankfully, there's no natural disasters or any military portion that we have to deal with, so we really can focus only on building. When I got to the end of this mission, I had a huge city that spanned all the way from the left side of the map straight across to the right side. And I also learned my lesson, by the way, to be sure and turn on the music so that way as the mission ends, I could actually hear some of the background noise that was meant to be there. In a rather abrupt twist, we learn that Caesar dies and that he named us to be the new Caesar. Hooray! Yay! Well, although that's the end of the campaign, it is not the end of the game because there are some standalone maps that you're able to play. They don't have a particular tie-in to the story, but they are meant to be more open-ended. Given that this is one of the main strengths of the game, I am glad that they added a handful of these style of maps in for people to enjoy. You know, it's now at this point that I would like to take a moment to just say thank you to everyone that contributed to making this game. Every single person that put some energy into this, I really truly appreciate it because I had no idea about this game until recently and it completely surprised me. This was such a wonderful time, so again, just thank you all for putting the time that you did into it. I really appreciate what it turned out to be. If any of you watching right now are interested in the game, I wanted to mention that it's at least 75% off on a regular basis, and in terms of US dollars, it goes down to $2.50. I'd like to highlight a couple of comments now from the previous video about Diablo about people's experiences that they said they had with the game. For example, this one person typed, "When I beat the game the first time back in a day, I didn't understand why the hero placed the stone in his forehead. I thought he wanted to gain Diablo's power and rule the world for himself." Completely understandable, especially given maybe what you caught in terms of the story. So yes, absolutely relatable. The next comment is, "I got the game around the time it came out. My grandmother gave me and my brother money so we could get our Christmas gifts ourselves and later open them at a family gathering. I myself got Diablo and the End of Days OST. I opened the gift and my grandma, who is very much Catholic, saw the cover of the game and had this baffled look on her face. I felt a bit bad about it, but only until I got the game booted up on the PC. This is absolutely ridiculous that your grandmother, who is highly religious, got you some gifts, or money rather, so you could buy your own gift, and it ended up being Diablo. That is absolutely ridiculous, and I can imagine it very well. So thank you both for sharing this. And it's at this point that I would like to mention, if anyone else has had interesting experiences, even with this game, CivCity Rome, let me know in the comments because I do find it interesting and I read absolutely every single one. And along those same lines, I would like to mention if you have any suggestions about other games that you would like to see spoken about or not so much reviewed, but just discussed, then also please let me know because again, I'm open to hearing anything and I like to read the comments about that. Well, at that point, I feel like we're just about done wrapping up the video here, so thank you all so much. I appreciate it, and it really means a lot, all of the support and so many wonderful comments. It just has been a beautiful thing to see. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are.